Welcoming you back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host TJ Mathewson. We're back here with another edition of the podcast coming to you guys on Pac-12 opening week, following Oregon State's win over San Diego State to wrap up the non-conference slate 3-0. Beavers are set to face Washington State in Pullman this weekend. We've got a lot of stuff to get to on the big podcast today. We're going to be joined by a special guest from WazzuWatch, our sister site up in Pullman this weekend. So that's going to be fun. Stay tuned for a little bit later in the podcast. But TJ, what's going on, man? How are you? You ready for Pac-12 week to get started? Beyond just Oregon State, Washington State, it's going to be some fantastic games this weekend.
It's a loaded slate. If you go check out our Pac-12 power rankings that we just put out, I mean, I'm trying to sort through the tiers of this conference so far, and you look at the middle six teams are all playing each other. I mean, who doesn't want to start conference play any other way? Like, that sounds great.
Oh, it's insane. I mean, when you look at knowing that we have, you mentioned our power rankings, make sure to go check those out at BeaversEdge.com as TJ, Dylan, and I give our weekly ranking of the Pac-12 teams and break it all down. But TJ, kind of expand on that a little bit. UCLA, for me, was at 8. They're ranked. We're talking 1 through 8. I mean, the fact that there are 8 teams ranked is nuts to begin with, right?
Yeah, it is. This is as good as the conference has been in just so long. They didn't disappoint in a week 3 on a slate that was kind of bad. There were some opportunities for upsets, and there were a couple of real clunkers in the conference. Stanford lost at home to Sac State. ASU, my alma mater, got shut out at home by Fresno State. But regardless, besides that, I mean, the conference took care of business. I mean, Colorado drew the most viewers of any ESPN game. Again, like continuing to set records. I mean, man, it's going as well as possible as we've seen in the non-conference for this entire conference since I've been paying attention to college football. Usually by now there's been a clunker upset.
Right.
There's been some team that just hasn't shown up on the road versus a good opponent. That's not been the case. It has been the case for Oregon State. It has been the case for anybody in this conference. And that's what's going to make conference play that much more intriguing, is we're now finally going to get to see all these matchups of all this hype and see which cream really rises to the top. Because I feel like in this conference, or what we've seen this year, like we've seen the top 2 teams in the whole country, Georgia and Michigan, look good, pretty good, but not like run away for a national championship right now. I mean, the conference could have 2 national title contenders at the top, USC and Washington, for how they look this year. And I really don't think, and the second tier of the conference, based on how they'll play here down the stretch, is that far off.
No, and I think, I think, like you said, I gave Washington the top spot this week. I think, the Huskies are playing some incredible football. I think Michael Penix is, arguably encroaching on Caleb Williams as maybe the most effective quarterback in college football, and he's putting together one hell of a Heisman case, if I do say so myself. However, it's early, right? Non-conference, there's 9 games left, right? So there's a lot of football left to be played. And, it all starts for Oregon State up on the Palouse this weekend, TJ. And, a place in Martin Stadium that's, quite tough for Oregon State to win. We're going to be getting into that a little bit later in the podcast. Again, we'll be joined by a member of our sister site, WazzuWatch. So definitely looking forward to that conversation as we give some picks and kind of dive into the nitty gritty. But let's quickly, TJ, recap, the win over San Diego State. A bit of a weird game now that we've kind of had the benefit of hindsight to look back and kind of look at the score was kind of odd. The game flow was a little bit odd. Jonathan Smith said it on Monday. He felt like the offense left some meat on the bone. I thought the defense, while they weren't great in the secondary and allowed some, passing plays towards the end of that game that really kind of, allowed San Diego State to kind of get some momentum. Thought the run defense was still good, and I thought if the defense didn't show up in that kind of same way, it would have been a much different game. It just seemed like DJU and the offense were never quite able to find that rhythm, and it was just kind of I've seen a wide range of Beaver fans' responses on, BeaversEdge.com on the damn board, but for the most part, it just seems like inconsistent or just an off game seems to be kind of the universal term agreed upon. What's kind of your thoughts, TJ? Is that what you saw out there too?
Well, DJ didn't get sacked in this game, but I think the mix of pressure was getting to him a little bit. He had more rushers in his face than he had each of the first 2 weeks. I
Agreed.
thought San Diego State really mixed it up well. And Jim Mahalchek, when we talked to him yesterday here, recording on a Wednesday, he said, the communication was tested. No two looks of that San Diego State defense looked the same. And I think it affected what DJ saw down the field. Wasn't totally trusting himself. We saw some overthrows. We saw the 2 interceptions that weren't great on his part. But what good teams do is they adapt. And I think Oregon State adapted nicely. What yards down the field, it wasn't there. So they pivot to the screen game, and the screen game really did most of the heavy lifting for this offense and made their numbers look, even better than they did. Oregon State right now through 3 weeks, Brenden, is top 10 nationally in yards per play on offense, which if you're in that range, you're pretty elite. Usually across the board, there's not much you do well. And Oregon State beat their mark on the season in this game against San Diego State. Again, just another incredibly efficient game. What was the overall yards per play? It was 7.7. That's an elite mark right there. But it didn't seem like it watching the game at all, which makes you really, I say, get excited when the offense actually clicks on all cylinders.
And how much of that too, and just an observation for me, it seemed like Reser Stadium a little sleepy at 12:30. Yeah. I don't know if compared to the week prior when it felt like you could grab a bolt of Zeus's electricity out of the air against UC Davis. It just a very different kind of vibe. And not to say that Oregon State wasn't ready to play early, as they played San Jose State at 12:30 on a Sunday, to open this season. I just think that for whatever reason, it was kind of a game where Oregon State didn't necessarily have their best or most consistent, but yet I think it speaks volumes to where Oregon State is now, folks. A couple years ago, it's still a home game, but this is maybe a game a couple years ago that Oregon State would have struggled with, in the sense that Oregon State is still learning how to be the hunted. So perhaps last year and even the year before, nobody expected much out of Oregon State. And I don't think week in and week out, people were, picking Oregon State to win and all these, things that they have now. Now, TJ, this year, they're dealing with that expectations monster. And I think, while it may, I just look at it as a reason, not necessarily an excuse, this team and this program is learning under Jonathan Smith week in, week out, what it means to be, a team that is actually in the mix for a Pac-12 title. And pundits expect them to play that way week in, week out. Do you kind of get a similar notion?
I guess it's so hard for me to think about that, because in the grand scheme of things, did you ever feel like the game was in doubt?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And
I'd be curious.
That's usually a good thing when it comes to evaluating a game. As much as we can nitpick here and there, the Beavers did their job, and they only allowed 9 points.
Right. So when you say that, when you say that, 9 points, even when I wrote my post-game story, I'm like, you can't, regardless of the yards or anything else, objectively, you can't be upset when your defense allows 9 points. That's objectively a good result, no?
9 points, under 5 yards of play on offense, just 70 net rushing yards at an average of just over 2 yards a rush for a team that's, when it's most successful offensively, they run the football. You checked the boxes of what you wanted to eliminate from San Diego State, and that's what you did. On top of that, while they might have gotten some yards through the air, we finally saw that defensive line really shine. It wasn't coming in blitz packages. It was coming when they had 4 defensive linemen lined up against 5 offensive linemen. Occasionally they would sprinkle a 5th one in there, and they would just win one-on-ones. And that's what you want to see. That's what makes defensive lines great. And that's what we'll preview it here. For this week is against this Cam Ward offense that passes a ton. You're going to need your disruptors on the defensive line, disrupting the passing game. And I thought they did it in that game.
Right. And that's definitely the good. You highlighted it exactly. I think the front 7 were pretty solid in this game. And, Jonathan Smith mentioned that on Monday, obviously being able to get pressure on the quarterback, being able to make things difficult, and obviously Maiden being the runner that he was, I believe it was over 7 yards a rush coming into the game. He was elusive. He was slippery. And I think that's definitely a good prep for Cam Ward, who also is kind of he's a bigger quarterback, at over 6 foot, over 200 pounds, but can move pretty well. But TJ, if we were going to talk about an area that absolutely needs to be better this week for Oregon State to win, it's that secondary. And particularly, whether, Cam Ward and Washington State can thrive on those drag routes, those slant routes, that crushed Oregon State. Again, like you said, maybe it's in between the 20s or what have you. They got the benefit of taking some points off the board late with that Achille Arnold interception, because that would have likely been at least 3 points for San Diego State, if not, a touchdown for where they were on that point in the field. Hard to say. But, getting into that, if there is an area that I'm concerned about heading into this game, it's that, because, I know our brains are all conditioned towards that Mike Leach Washington State offense where it's, firing those quick slants all day, so on. Jake Dickert and Cam Ward, it's a different offense, but the crux of it is still the same. They are a passing attack far more than they are a running attack. Hence, Cam Ward is their leading rusher after 3 games. So that should tell you where their running game is, and I believe he's their leading rusher with about 90 yards. So much different, but they're hitting it big time in that passing game, TJ. And, I look back at this weekend, looking at the snap counts, that other, I think, Jaden Robinson obviously been playing well at that one corner, but I think the key spot to be in this game is how Trice Ivy or Jermod McCoy, those guys each got about equal run in that game against San Diego State. The pass coverage, in my opinion, needs to be tighter. Obviously, we knew going into the season with what they lost, that was going to be a work in progress and something that got better as the season went along. But these Cougars, they're going to challenge them this weekend. And if Oregon State is, if that secondary plays like they did against San Diego State, that's where I see some problems happening on the Palouse.
Washington State is going to complete some passes. I mean, that's just the nature of their offense. They're top whatever nationally and pass play percentage. They throw it over 55% of the time. So, you're not going to eliminate that, but it's the type of pass plays that you allow. And overall, the Beavers, for the most part, limited explosive pass plays against San Diego State. So if you limit the explosive pass plays against Washington State as well, I think you'll be okay. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was probably a mix of miscommunication on some of these under routes against San Diego State. Occasionally it was just, lining up in man coverage. And when you're running a route across the field in man coverage, it's pretty hard to defend. It's a man beater because you're using the space of the field to manipulate yourself open. And that just happens. So it's going to be interesting. And I think this offense is going to be very much different than anything they've seen so far this season. 27-year-old offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle. Washington State. Brenden, how does that make you feel? You are the same age as a Power 5 offensive coordinator. You've made it, buddy. You've passed the players now, and now you're into the coaching ranks.
My comment to that, and I did not know how young Ben Arbuckle was, but just initial reaction to that, maybe I should have got into coaching and tried to get a graduate assistantship that I could have worked my way up. No, I mean, I'm far more qualified to talk about football and analyze it than design up plays and all that. But, it's definitely interesting because, Jake Dickert's side of the ball, the side of the ball that he's, hung his hat on has been defense. Obviously gets hired as their defensive coordinator under Nick Rolovich and, that whole situation. Parlays, we don't need to get into all that. But, long story short, he ends up getting the job and, they roll with it. But, I think it's interesting because Washington State's been explosive. I mean, you mentioned the passing attack. I get that they're more of a passing game than a running game, but still over 530 yards total offense per game. Their games, their matchups with Colorado State, Wisconsin, and Northern Colorado. I mean, in my opinion, I think that Wisconsin's the best team out of that mix. Hard to say on Colorado State, because that was a wacky game on Saturday night, and I don't know how good Colorado State is. I don't know how good Colorado is. Therefore, I don't know how good Washington State is. So that's going to have to flesh itself out in conference play. TJ, I feel like you and I could do a whole podcast, Colorado week, I think you and I will be able to do like 3 podcasts worth of bulletin board material. So all
There's
that
gonna
aside,
Yeah, that's going to be a fascinating week of media because, like, are people still going to be talking about Dion as much that
I don't
week
know. We'll see how they do this weekend
as they
down
are
in
now?
Eugene.
Because it's, people like he is, I mean, he's headline on First Take,
Right.
on
It's
Pat
incredible.
McAfee, I mean, here we
It's
are on the
incredible.
Oregon State, Washington State podcast talking about Dion Sanders, Brenden. I mean, that's like,
Yeah. Well, and here's the most fascinating thing that I will leave with this. We'll do a quick little sidebar on this. This got posed to me by my host Justin Myers on Rip City Mornings this morning. I had to mention it. If Colorado hired Deion Sanders 2 years earlier, a year earlier, does his impact give the Pac-12 a media deal? And that is a fascinating question. Absolutely fascinating.
does it give them a
So,
media does it give them a media deal? It gives them an offer. The
right.
question is, do they accept it? Because we know,
And
as we know, Brenden, with all the details that have come out, there have been offers.
right.
Just the brain trust for some reason turns the
Rejected
offers
it. Yeah.
down, thinking they can do better.
Right.
So yes, and maybe he might increase the value. I don't know, a
It's
few
more than
million
you
dollars,
think, man.
30 to $35 million per se,
Right.
something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But
I mean,
in the end,
it was
in the end, they're like there's still something on the other side that needs to happen to make it all
Oh,
click.
sure. I mean, I just like you said, like the fact that ESPN was probably, still one of the leaders in that clubhouse. And like you said, I haven't been able to turn on again. If you turn on ESPN, folks, you think Colorado's the only team in college football. Like it's all the NFL and then Colorado. So, like like I said, different conversation for a different day, but just had to mention that as we were kind of looking in. But with all that to be said, kind of putting a bow tie on Oregon State's matchup with San Diego State, TJ. Do you think it's beneficial to the Beavers that they had a game like San Diego State where things didn't quite go right compared to Washington State, who really, Wisconsin maybe a little bit, hasn't hit a big time speed bump?
Yeah, it is good. You need bad tape because otherwise you don't know what you do wrong. And the defenses are different because Washington State's Power Five, and they're a good defense. They have
Sure.
a number of strengths on that defense, but
Particularly on the edge.
yeah, like on the edge, and that wasn't really San Diego State's game. San Diego State's game was physicality and turning the football over for the
Sure.
most part.
It was.
Washington
Yeah.
State's strength is those two edge guys. So you needed to show that you could struggle against the defense. You know where potential weaknesses on this offense could be. When this Oregon State offense clicks, I mean, you don't really think
Sure.
there's a weakness. You think the tight end group is strong. You think the running backs are the best in the conference. You think your quarterback is a star. You think your wide receivers are criminally underrated nationally and are explosive like we saw, right? They're like, I'm not naming any weaknesses, but you need to find that, like, hey, it's not
Right.
all roses out here. Not everything's going to work and you'll have to adapt. And that's what Oregon State did. Despite a lot of things not working, they bust out a few explosive plays versus San Diego State and they realized we can still make this work. So yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and with that, I think it was, a couple things that I think were good leading into this week. Kind of again putting a bow tie on San Diego State. I think it was good for DJ to experience a little bit of adversity, especially after the fact that UC Davis was interesting. Having game 2, like not that DJ wasn't used to it being at Clemson, they were in some routes, but I think that kind of was interesting. Having that UC Davis game where he just flat out did not play in the second half, and then against San Jose State where I think that was his best game as far as just looking in complete control of the offense. And to your extent, I think it's a combination of both. Going back to what you mentioned about DJ and the pass protection, I think there was some pass protection issues, yes, but I also think DJ needs to be a little bit better at getting the ball out and knowing what his hot reads were and so on. DJ's not a freshman quarterback out there. I mean, you look back at last midseason, like with Ben Gulbranson when he came in, we're like, there's going to be some growing pains for the fact that he has not been a starting quarterback at the collegiate level. And that was just going to be what it was. DJ coming in with what he has, he's experienced extreme highs and extreme lows kind of already, as far as maybe not like low as far as like the opponent, like playing a lower tier opponent, but like the lows of like getting benched by a national program. Like
Yeah.
that's an all-time low, right? And he's also, quarterbacked his teams to big time wins too. So I think him experiencing a little adversity will kind of light a fire under him and kind of get him prepped for this week. And then, the other thing that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, Micaiah Tongue
Yeah.
lost for the year due to, leg, knee injury. Not entirely sure, Beavers didn't get into specifics other than just saying he wasn't going to play again this year. But TJ, he was a guy that you and I loved throughout fall camp, had really come into his own inside linebacker. And while Beaver fans might look and say, hey, it's not a starter that they lost, Micaiah was huge on special teams. And I remember within the first week of fall camp, TJ, you put in your practice reports, his instinct for playing the position was terrific. And, I think the Beavers have some great young guys in Melvin Jordan, Isaiah Chisholm, and maybe even Cord Shaw to an extent to kind of step into that mix. But Micaiah Tongue is still a significant loss, and obviously, that's going to lead into Oregon State's kind of defensive rotations behind Calvin Hart and Easton Mascarenas looking a little bit different this weekend.
Even with him not starting, he still played a lot. He was still
Right.
crucial for rotating in there on certain
Yes, he
downs when
was.
they needed him. It's a good thing Calvin Hart's back and healthy. We talked to him
Yeah.
today, which was good to hear. But it's gonna really stretch the depth here, and I don't know where it affects the Beavers the most. If they feel like the strength would be in the run game or in the defending against the pass, but regardless, I mean, you're losing a really good athlete there at the linebacker position that we'll see. And Washington State, again, they utilize all parts of the field with their offense. I'd be curious to see how much that'll affect the Oregon State defense. So yeah, it's a huge loss and bummer for him. Finally finding a home, like on a
Right.
position, unable to crack the depth chart for a wide receiver, flips the defense, playing well, playing a lot, and all of a sudden, boom, just like that, season's over.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a brutal loss, and that was definitely the bummer news of the post San Diego State game, excuse me. But a couple other injury updates for us to kind of get into as we kind of prepare for the break and get ready to welcome on our guest this week over from the WazzuWatch, our sister site up there in Pullman. We mentioned obviously Micaiah Tongue being out. John Miller, who was another inside linebacker who, is kind of right there in that mix and, near starter level before Calvin Hart ultimately won that job out of fall camp. He didn't play against San Diego State. Jonathan Smith said his status is unclear for this weekend. They're hopeful, but waiting to see how he feels. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. Also didn't see Josiah Irish against San Diego State either. Jeremiah Noga got the start in his place. And real quickly, TJ, saw it this today and got posted on the damn board. Jeremiah Noga earned a scholarship this week. Jonathan
That's
Smith
awesome.
did the video, and just got to give him credit. As just an observer from the outside, I couldn't imagine, the even further due diligence required being a non-scholarship athlete and expected to do everything that a scholarship athlete does. Just wanted to give a shout out to Jeremiah Noga for earning that scholarship. But obviously, Jeremiah Noga been playing well, but the Beavers would like to have Josiah Irish back. His status will also be determined throughout the week. And perhaps on the defensive side, also importantly, Ryan Cooper Jr. Got banged up in that game, and we actually saw him, on the cart, leaving post game. Good news is, talking to Jonathan Smith, it was just a minor kind of tweak thing, nothing serious, which, again, given the secondary that we talked about earlier and how they're still putting the pieces together, having a guy like Coop is extremely important, and he's another guy they're going to be watching. I mean, TJ, do you think these injuries and whether or not some of these guys can or cannot go could impact whether or not Oregon State's able to get the win or not?
I think Coop is probably a guy you want. I mean, he's a now a second-year starter.
Yeah.
And you need as we're sitting here saying the secondary needs to play better. Well, it helps if they have a guy like Ryan Cooper in the secondary. Right. So we'll have to see. Yeah, that's probably the one I'd be looking at the most.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how those injuries ultimately end up, flushing themselves out by the end of the week. It's always always, interesting to see how, little tweaks and all that kind of stuff works out. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, obviously, this week. And we'll have the latest injury report at BeaversEdge.com ahead of the matchup. We'll go ahead and take our first break here on the podcast. We'll be back here shortly with our interview with WazzuWatch.com. We'll be further previewing the matchup with Washington State. Stay tuned. Welcoming you back into the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined as always by KAGO radio host and Beavers Edge writer TJ Mathewson, and also joined by WazzuWatch beat reporter Kuria Pounds joining us here on the podcast. Kuria, thanks so much for joining us, man, to talk a little bit about the Cougs this weekend. Big time matchup. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks you guys for the invitation. I'm really excited for, another big matchup. Obviously, with everything going on, top 25 matchup, obviously the Beavers, great team defensively, and the Cougs, obviously another great team defensively. So I'm just excited for a good matchup on Saturday under the bright lights, nationally telecasted for, obviously certain reasons as we'll get into later. But, just excited for a great game this weekend and another great meeting between these two schools.
Absolutely. And again, thanks for joining us here on the podcast to get a good angle on Washington State, and got to give our sister site a shout out up there in Pullman. I'm curious for you, Kuria, just kind of starting a little bit, just with kind of the vibes. I know you and I are working on an article that we'll be working on both of our websites this week, kind of talking about some bigger picture stuff, and kind of want to tease that because it's going to be great. Make sure to check out that at BeaversEdge and WazzuWatch.com. But I'm kind of curious, what's the vibe up in Pullman right now? And, kind of like Corvallis, is there kind of an optimism about the season, but a little bit of a kind of cloud over what the future is going to hold?
Yeah, I mean, Brenden, you couldn't have explained it pretty more accurately than you just did. I mean, up in Pullman, as soon as the news broke out, you kind of felt like a certain weight, drop on the program, and it was a lot of confusion, a lot of what's going to happen, what's going to happen this year, what's going to happen for the future, a lot of questions and a lot of heavy hearts because obviously, we talked about our article, which we'll be previewing hopefully tomorrow. Make sure to check that out once again on Beavers Edge and WazzuWatch. But it's been a fun season, but at the same time, a season with a little bit of sadness, just because a lot of people are saying this maybe the last season, for both of our schools, in this Pac-12 and now down to the Pac-2, and obviously with this pending lawsuit going on with potentially trying to block all the other teams from getting money for leaving us in the dust, pretty much. It's been a really interesting vibe. It's been up and down. Obviously, a lot of people coming out this season, and we've already sold out one game against Wisconsin, which was an amazing ball game. And then now, obviously, with our game Saturday nearing a sellout again, and it just kind of shows, the dedication that, Coug fans all over are embracing this kind of not last season mentality, but, and the fact that they're already back in the top 25, obviously we weren't even preseason ranked to be nowhere near the top 25. And the way they have looked through camp, connecting to the first three games of the season, it's pretty evident that this team is really trying to make a statement. And I know down in Corvallis, you guys are doing the same thing over there. And that's pretty much been the mentality, trying to make a statement to the college football world that, hey, we're here and we can play at this level. And don't you dare disrespect our name. That is the complete vibe now versus what it was, pretty much a little bit about a month ago when it was a lot of, we don't really know what's going to happen,
No, and I think that's, perfectly said. TJ, go for it.
No, I was going to say, so you mentioned Kuria, one of those guys on Wazoo who's making that statement towards the country and everyone else, and one of the real engineers of this program over the last two seasons has been Cam Ward. What's been his biggest step this year? I mean, he's come out, he's got over 100 pass attempts without an interception. He looks good in the new offense. Washington State's averaging over 48 points a game. What's been the big difference maker for him so far?
I think it just is comfortability. You see the way he plays. Last year, obviously it was his first year in the FBS level, coming from Incarnate Ward at the FCS level. It's a big transition, and a little bit of a bigger, brighter lights. Obviously, for his second game, he had to go to Camp Randall and play Wisconsin, and that's one of the biggest stadiums in college football. And that's obviously a lot of emotions, a lot of nerves in, and you could definitely see that throughout the first season while he was playing under OC Eric Morris and his wouldn't say stale, but different offense compared to Ben Arbuckle, and it's kind of like night and day when you see it throughout the season. First three games, he's already on the Heisman watch. We've already seen this. I already talked about it a little bit in Brendan's article that he asked me about. Last year we saw some highlights. That game against Oregon. Where he scrambled out and had the little toss pass, and it was caught and ran. We've seen some magician like plays from Cam Ward, and that's kind of been the big reason as to why he's been on that dark horse Heisman watch, because we've seen it at Incarnate Ward, but it's just like a little bit of a transition. And now this year with Arbuckle and his air raid like offense, it pretty much is night and day. And now Cam Ward looks a lot more comfortable. You see him making great throws. That's been the biggest thing, stepping up in the pocket, because he's usually type to scramble out and try to make a play out of nothing, but instead he's steady, he's more confident in the pocket. I say that's been the biggest thing, just him being able to stay in the pocket, and if pressure comes in, he's able to step up. Or even with him being technically the leading rusher for Wazoo, him on those designed runs. And that's been kind of the strategy with having him, with his dual threat ability to run the ball and, make defense shuffle a little bit. That's kind of been the biggest step, just his confidence in the pocket and his confidence with the ball. Because last year we saw some bad turnovers with Cam Ward that you would just shake your head and like, man, it's a freshman mistake, it's a rookie mistake. But now you really don't see many of those. It's just a lot more comfortable and a lot more comfortable at the FBS level, I'd say.
And a big help to that also is a rebuild offensive line too.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line was not a big problem last year, but it was a secondary problem because of all the penalties the offensive line would rack up. Cougars would always be starting out, first and 20, first and 15, getting behind the chains. And that was the biggest issue with this offense last year. They would always get behind the chains and be starting at first and 20, 25 instead of a first and 10. And, when you're getting behind the chains, you're not going to be making that many first downs. So, that was the biggest problem. And now it's with this year, with how this offensive line looks now, obviously at first we've seen for Wazoo, Connor Godness, our center, the center for the Cougs. And we've seen a little bit of a shaky start with his snap ability with him. I don't know if you guys saw, but I think in the Colorado State game, he had 3 fumbled snaps that were a little too low. And it was just a little bit of a miscommunication. And, we saw it in week 2. There were a couple snaps where, they were a little too low. So that's kind of been the big issue this season, just with the offensive line, as well as the run game, because the run game has pretty much been inexistent for the Cougs. But at the same time, with the matchups the Cougs have had, they've kind of been beneficial through the air because the matchups are better, with the secondary, and the Cougs wide receivers, can move and beat those guys in those slot routes, especially, Lincoln Victor, great story for him out of Maui, obviously. And, prayers out to him and his family, obviously, in Maui. But just how this offense has looked throughout the first 3 games has just been because those matchups, with the secondary, with Wisconsin versus the run defense, has been a lot better with the offensive line. So it's a little bit of an improvement. At the same time, they're still, working out those early season, troubles throughout the first 3 games of the non-conference slate.
Something that TJ told me when we were recording the earlier part of our podcast today, Kuria, he mentioned that Arbuckle's 27 years old. Got to be one of the youngest coaches you've ever seen, right? Especially coordinators, nonetheless.
I mean, that dude's 3 years older than me. I mean, that's just crazy to see. But, I mean, with Arbuckle, the way his offense looked, as the QB's coach and, slash offensive coordinator at Western Kentucky last year, he developed Austin Reed, who was a decent quarterback and made him, one of the best quarterbacks in terms of throwing the ball last year. And, now we see with Cam Ward at the Power 5 level. And look, amazing story for Arbuckle. He has really embraced, this coup culture. We see him on the sidelines, wearing the swagged out Wazoo hats all the time, and everyone's saying, we want one, we need one. And, he just has embraced the coup culture so much throughout his quick time here. And amazing offense he's running so far. Obviously, Cam Ward, in the Heisman conversation, number 7 total offense in the country so far. And that's without a fully developed run game. And that has been the missing piece for this offense. But I feel like now that we get into the Pac-12 season, with heavy defenses in terms of what the secondary looks like for some teams, and obviously what's up front. Now with the run game potentially being more needed, it's kind of the missing piece of the puzzle that could maybe turn this offense up a little more. But amazing story for Arbuckle. It's crazy. He is the youngest Power 5 coordinator in the game right now, and that's crazy. And look what he's doing. He's putting up a top 7 offense through the first 3 games of the season. And now, mind you, yes, one of them was an FCS school against Northern Colorado. But you can't discredit Colorado State after what we just saw on Saturday night against Colorado. Sure. And then Wisconsin, obviously one of the best offensive attacks in terms of the running game. And they just brought in Tanner Mordecai from SMU, and they obviously just brought in Luke Fickell from Cincinnati. So if there's offense all around, and Ben Arbuckle has been able to withhold himself and take that challenge, and now leading one of the best offenses, surprisingly, in the Pac-12, Wazoo, who was ranked near the bottom just a season ago.
I'm curious also, you mentioned the running game a little bit. Are you surprised that Nakia Watson's kind of had the slow start to the season that he has, or does that kind of go with what you mentioned with facing some tough run defenses? And going along with that, with Oregon State having a good run defense, does Washington State think they need to or even care to run the ball against Oregon State, or will it be all on Cam Ward's arm this weekend?
Yeah, I feel like with the matchups earlier throughout the season, Wisconsin known for having a pretty steady run defense, and then obviously Colorado State, trying to stop the run. We've seen it against Colorado as well, but we saw a little bit of a spurt of it against Northern Colorado because they have one of the worst run defenses in the FCS right now. They allowed, I think, almost 200 yards a game, and we saw a little bit of it with Wazoo totaling 708. Yeah, that's right, 718 total yards of offense last week, which was unbelievable to see. But I feel like now that we're facing obviously a great run defense as well, I feel like we're going to start to see a little bit more of spurts of Nakia Watson. It's been interesting because, Jake Dickert, our head coach, obviously, he's been hammering, we need to run the ball. And I feel like it's partly, yes, obviously, this offense should be led through the run. And we've seen what Nakia Watson can do when he becomes more explosive. But that goes back to the offensive line, what I brought up earlier, just not winning the battle in the trenches. That's been a big issue as well. They've been not winning the battle up front, and, all those gaps that Nakia usually would go through, they're getting filled up. And, he's not really getting that explosive ability, to break out. And that's really been the big issue so far. So part of it is the offense, in terms of what the matchup is in terms of better run defenses. Part of it is also, this offensive line, really not doing the best to their ability to widen those gaps so that Nakia Watson can break out. So it's a lot of, interesting factors, but I feel after last week's game against Northern Colorado that this run offense is finally starting to get themselves under their own foot, no pun intended. And I think we finally may see some of the run on Saturday, and it's not just designed runs for Cam Ward. Obviously, we probably will see some of those because I think Ben Arbuckle, is doing a really good job at strategically, placing his QB runs when it's with Cam Ward or even John Mateer. We've seen some runs for John Mateer throughout the first few games where it's designed and he can, break out of that ability, and he has that speed on the ground. But we've also saw last week in Tier his ability to throw. And, I feel like he is definitely approaching Cam Ward a little more, but, Cam Ward is just on a different level. But I feel like with this run offense, it has definitely been the biggest missing piece. And I feel like now we are starting to see a lot more of it, and hopefully you see some more on Saturday against a really good run defense in the Beavers.
Let's go over to the other side of the ball. We know the matchup that everyone's going to be looking at. It's going to be the two edge rushers, Ron Stone and Brenden Jackson, versus Joshua Gray and Talisi Fuaga on the other side for Oregon State. One of the best offensive lines in the country against a defensive line that's been pretty good this season, especially with those two edge guys for Washington State. Is there another matchup you're looking at besides those two for the Washington State defense against the Oregon State offense?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hammered my main one. It's just that offensive line of Oregon State, one of the best in the country. We've seen it in spurts this season. Obviously, there was a highlight I think I saw in that San Jose State game where, Ugalele had almost all day in that pocket. He was almost building a house back there, for God's sakes. And, we see what this defense can do. And obviously, when Brenden Jackson said it a few weeks ago before the Wisconsin game, he said, if you're going to come to Pullman, you have to play hard. And Wisconsin, obviously, known for their offensive line and protection and letting Braylon Allen and Cesar Lucy get through those gaps. Wazoo shut that down. 19 carries, 69 total yards for the Badgers on that afternoon or evening, I should say. So other than the upfront battle in the trenches, I want to see what the secondary can do, because obviously we've seen spurts of what Ugalele can do. And he is talented. Obviously, 5-star recruit, went to Clemson, then transferred over to Oregon State and moving up to Corvallis. We're going to see a different offense that we saw last year, because the Cougars obviously last year, we knew coming into that game in Corvallis that it was going to be a lot run heavy with Damian Martinez, very talented back, obviously. He's averaging 9 yards a carry this year. He's very talented. So we know what the matchup's going to be. But now that Ugalele's coming in, I think the secondary, with what Jaden Hicks is doing this year, he is having an amazing year up in Pullman. I mean, I've seen him, and I've been comparing him to Jamal Adams of the Seattle Seahawks. And that's just not being me a homer because I'm a Seahawks fan. But when you see him, he's at the line. He can get to the quarterback. And then when he's in the secondary, he reads so well. And that's been a big improvement. So I want to see what this secondary can do, reading a great talent in Ugalele, because the Cougars have faced, not the greatest quarterback opposition, the best one being probably Tanner Mordecai. But now that they're facing a talented one, I think the secondary is going to be a little bit interesting to see what they can do against talent in Ugalele on Saturday.
No, that's a good point. And, to mention that, you and TJ might have to get together and talk some Hawks sometime, because you got TJ over here who's a big-time Hawks fan too.
Hey, TJ, go Hawks, man. We got a big game on Sunday. We need another win, right?
Yeah, it was good last Sunday too. It was nice to see him turn it around.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Going back to your point, Kuria, on the defense, great analysis of the defense. They're kind of building on that a little bit in a more general sense. Obviously from your interviews and talking to Washington State this week, what have kind of been the themes that they've kind of talked about with Oregon State? What's kind of been something Coach Dickert's mentioned, or maybe any of the players? Like, what stands out to the players about Oregon State?
The big number is 8.8, and that 8.8 is how many yards per carry Damian Martinez is averaging. And that is a number that the Cougars want to limit as much as possible. We know what the matchup is going to be, obviously. We mentioned it just before, in the trenches, that Oregon State offensive line that can make holes for Martinez to run through. And the Cougars up front, as well as those linebackers in Kyle Thornton and Devin Richardson, who love to play physical football as well. And that's been the big message defensively, just making sure that the run is stopped. Because last year we saw Martinez just run right through this defense, putting up many, many yards on the evening against the Cougars in Corvallis. And they don't want to see another similar sight in Pullman on Saturday night. That's been the main attack offensively, but as well, seeing how we can limit Ugalele in the air as well. We've seen how talented he is. He makes some good throws. Obviously, last week, a little bit of a rusty week, but, in the end, when you have Damian Martinez rushing for that many yards, it doesn't really matter. So just pretty much making sure that we can stop the run as much as possible, because then we can keep ourselves in this game. This offensive attack, we know, is definitely one of the best in the Pac-12 in terms of the run. And Martinez going to be a running back candidate of the week almost every week. And and defensively, we know we can stop the run. We did it against Wisconsin, and we've done it against Colorado State and Northern Colorado in back-to-back weeks. But we are suspended to the big play, and the big play happens many, many times for the Cougs in terms of, a little run that can be 11 and 12 yards, turn into an 89-yard run up the field. And we know Damian Martinez is definitely capable of that ability with his breakout speed. So we have to limit the big plays as much as possible and just stopping the run, but also making sure that we're not giving up the big plays over the top with Ukulele in his arm.
Question kind of for both of you guys. We'll let TJ kind of do the Oregon State perspective and Kuria over in Washington State. Do you guys think that the offense that is able to be the most at home, the most in their shoes, in their comfort zone, will be the winner of this contest? We'll start with you, TJ.
I think it mostly comes down to not only the performance of the quarterback, but we think this Oregon State offense they're playing on the road for the first time this season in a hostile environment. It's going to be loud. It's going to be rowdy. There's going to be the most noise they face this season. I compared the San Jose State crowd to a brunch crowd. It was quiet, relaxed. People had a little alcohol in their system, but not too much. So it was kind of an odd first environment. But this is a real college football environment they're walking into on Saturday. So you got to wonder, so how's the communication going to be? How are the penalties going to be on offense? Are they staying on script? I would say, is Damian Martinez going to run? Yeah, he's going to run. They're probably going to do pretty well, even if it's not 8.8 yards per carry. They've managed to pretty much bowl over whoever they've wanted so far this season. And then again, can they do enough through the air? It doesn't need to be great. It just needs to be enough. That was the sentiment when DJ came in. It's like, hey, we need to do enough through the air. We need enough on all three levels. And now DJ is going to be facing his toughest competition. So, yeah, I mean, Oregon State's offense does need to be on script. They absolutely need to be in that summary.
Kuria?
For the Cougs, it feels like, they need to be on script, but at the same time, they kind of don't. With this run offense that has been a little bit of a struggle at the beginning. We've talked about it before, just with Cam Ward being the lead rusher and Jake Dickert saying, we cannot let that happen. And now facing a great run defense, it feels like they're going to make an adjustment with the run, but at the same time, not, because of how much success they have had through the air. And that is going to be one of the more interesting offensive attacks. I feel like, with how talented this receiving core is with Kyle Williams. And we saw Josh Kelly last week have a Moss-like catch, almost mossing a guy. And Lincoln Victor in the slot. That's been Cam Ward's favorite target all season. He's been racking up the receptions last week, six receptions, 119 yards and a touchdown. I think the week before, I think he had double digits, 12 or 13 against Wisconsin, just being that X factor for him. And we saw it last year when Robert Farrell, who was in the slot for the Cougs last year, he was one of Cam Ward's favorite targets, that kind of down the stretch. And now that's being linked to Victor because he's in that slot position. So if the Cougs offense is going to be what it's been in terms of the pass, then I feel like that's going to be what the script is. But at the same time, adding that run offense and not letting it, be just a carry of one and winning that battle up front at the line is definitely going to be a huge help for this Cougs offense against a great Beavers run defense.
Oregon State, Washington State set to kick off at Martin Stadium, 4 p.m. Saturday on Fox. Oregon State enters right now, as of Wednesday, recording this podcast, a 3-point favorite. The over-under in the matchup is 58.5. Kuria, how do you think this matchup is going to shake out in your mind? We don't have to give predictions this far out unless you want to, obviously, but just how do you think the script of this game will fall out? And then we'll let TJ go ahead and follow after you.
Yeah, I think that over-under honestly is pretty high. I think this is going to be a very defensive game. We talk about these two run defenses, with Oregon State and how they can stop the run immediately. But, then we've also seen Cam Ward start a little slowish and, kind of get himself under his own feet. But this year, it's a completely different version. It's more of them setting the tone early. And I just don't know which Coug offense we're going to get now that they're facing a top talented defense versus, obviously the Wisconsin defense pretty much being their toughest opponent, as well as Colorado State on the run. But I think this game is going to be a very, very defensive-minded battle, especially on the ground. I'm interested to see what's going to happen in the air. I think it's going to go. Personally, if that's the over under, I think this game may go under. Honestly, I think this may be a very low scoring, very battle in the trenches affair. With both of these teams, obviously, kind of first game. I even alluded it into your article, Brenden, about how this is the first real game for both of these teams in the Pac-12. Obviously with a lot of emotions and a lot of meaning for this game as well. I think this is going to be a very defensive game, and I like this game going, pretty under. I think this is like a 24-21 type ball game. Maybe a last second field goal by either team. I still don't know who's gonna win this game. I've been going back and forth with just how the defenses look and which Cam Ward we're gonna get in this first conference game of the season. Now with another year because Wazoo was in this similar spot last year. They were 3-0. They were just outside of the top 25 at the time, but they had a ranked opponent coming in Oregon where they looked great, and then obviously that collapse in the second half happened, ending in the loss. And we don't know which Cam Ward we're going to get this year. With an offense stalled last year, hopefully not this year. I think, although with that, I think this is going to be a very defensive game. Me, I'm going to go with my Cougs. I don't know what the score is, but I'm thinking in that like 24-21, very low scoring, defensive minded game. And I think this game is just going to be one of the classics in Pullman. I think this is going to be one of the greatest games, honestly. I think this may be a great game just because of everything that's going on with this game. I talked about earlier with, Old Beav and Old Crimson now being in unison at College Game Day with the story, with just the fan bases uniting, just everything that is mattered with this game. But both teams being ranked, for the first time in a long time at the same time in this battle. I think the offense has come out a little slow to start out adjusting to that better level of play. And I think the defense has capitalized on that. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, but I'm going to pick my Cougs in the end, maybe 24-21, maybe even like a 20-17, 21-20, somewhere in that range, very low scoring.
TJ, how about you?
If it does come down to a battle of the trenches, it's just hard not to pick Oregon State in this game. You think about it, they're going to have the advantage at the line of scrimmage in pretty much any game they play this season, especially with their offensive line out there on the field. So, if as long as DJ's not making mistakes, I have a hard time seeing Oregon State at least being in a spot where they're disadvantaged. I think they're going to be in a spot to win this game, and I think they're going to come through and win this game. I think there's too much talent at the skill positions, and I think they're just too fortified along the most important positions on the football field, along the offensive and defensive lines, at running back and at quarterback as well. And of course, Brenden, this hasn't even come up yet. How's Atticus Sappington going to kick on the road in a hostile environment? Haven't really seen that yet. We mentioned of hey, hitting the ceiling for Oregon State this season. You got to make all your kicks when it matters most. Atticus was pretty good. He did really shank one against San Diego State, but now he's going to be on the road in a hostile environment and a game that Vegas thinks is going to be close. It might come down to his right leg. Is he going to make the kick? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I would pick Oregon State. I'd pick them by the spread by 3.
Yeah, kind of in between the two of you guys there. I think it's one of those things, and this is where I think the higher scoring it is favors Washington State more. The lower scoring it is favors Oregon State a little bit more. And I think that's just kind of based on going back to my question that I posed to you guys. I really do think whichever offense is more at home is going to be controlling tempo and therefore keeping the other offense on the sideline, whether that's, Oregon State and Damian Martinez keeping Cam Ward on the sideline, or Cam Ward and company keeping DJ and Damian Martinez on the sideline. I really do think that's going to be the key in this game. It's a tough one, right? Vegas has it as 3-point line as for what it is. I do think Oregon State has a slight edge in this advantage or in this matchup entering the week, but I really do think this could be a pick'em type game where it could honestly come down to the last second kind of field goal. I do expect it to be within a 3 to 7 point margin. And the difference for me is going to be turnovers. Does Cam Ward turn the ball over more, or does DJU or Oregon State's offense turn the ball over? So I think that's ultimately going to be how that shakes itself out. And, bottom line, fellas, it's going to be a great game between, two teams who, for all the reasons we talked about, are just really determined to show everyone that they matter this year. And this is the first kind of Pac-12 game to be able to do that. These are the quote unquote two-pack left. And I think both of them have a burning desire to win the conference in the final year. Now, with that being said, are you out of the conference race with one loss? No, but one loss in week one, you've got a lot of work to do over the next 8 to make that Pac-12 title game and maybe even get some help depending on how things shake out. So all that to be said, I think it's going to be a massive game for the two teams. And, big thanks to Kuria Pounds for joining us here on the Edge podcast, man. It was awesome catching up with you, and wish I was heading up to Pullman to be able to make your acquaintance this weekend, but hold it down for us up there and make sure to have some of that Cougar Gold while you're up there.
Oh, I will. Cougar Gold is definitely going to be on the to-do list. I appreciate you guys. Thank you guys for inviting me. Obviously, with everything going on in this game, I just want to, send my thank yous to you guys down in Corvallis just for the invite, and obviously with just everything going on. Obviously the Pac-2, it's us versus the world right now, and in unison. And I even heard that potentially, Cougs and Beavs are going to be on the field, in unison together after the game potentially, and like a little bit of a statement saying, "Hey, we're here." And you mentioned it. One loss week one to either one of these teams is going to be tough, especially in this loaded conference with all these teams in the top 25. Next week you're probably going to be playing one of those teams, and either on the road or at home, and that's going to be in a tough environment, tough game. So it's tough that we don't want either team to lose, but unfortunately one is going to have to. But at the end of the day, we're both going to be in unison together, and I just send my thank yous. And obviously I got to come down to Corvallis one day. I've seen the improvement of research. That looks beautiful. I got a friend of mine who is a big Beaver fan. He has been telling me about it. I got to check it out, but I will definitely eat some Cougar Gold for you guys.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Anything else you want to add, TJ?
No, I'm good. Thanks again, Kuria.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again to Kuria Pounds for joining us on this edition of the Edge podcast. Make sure to stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com and WazzuWatch.com. As Kuria mentioned earlier in the podcast, we've got some awesome dual articles that we've exchanged this week, some real exclusive stuff for our subscribers. So you're going to want to check that out and get on the message boards and start this whole conversation because, as Kuria mentioned, Oregon State, Washington State fans, y'all got a lot in common right now. So find some common ground. Head on over to BeaversEdge.com, WazzuWatch.com. Listen to me, listen to Kuria, TJ as well. And again, big shout out to Kuria Pounds for joining us on this edition of the podcast. And as always, thanks to TJ Mathewson for joining us. We'll be back next week here on the Edge podcast, recapping Oregon State's matchup against Washington State.